Good morning and welcome to Rising. I'm Spencer Brown, filling in for Amber Athey. Jessica, it is wonderful to be back with you while Amber is off at her wedding. Last time we did this, it was Friday Eve. Now it's actually Friday. How are you doing?
It's great to be on with you on a Friday. Why don't you tell us what's going on in D.C.?
Well, Jessica, we've got some developing news this morning on Capitol Hill where there's been no shortage of that. Donald Trump has endorsed Jim Jordan for Speaker of the House, quelling speculation the former president could himself take the helm. In a Truth Social post last night, Trump said, quote, "Jordan is strong on crime, borders, our military and veterans, and the Second Amendment. Jim, his wife Polly, and family are outstanding. He will be a great Speaker of the House and has my complete and total endorsement." There was a lot of speculation around this as after the ouster of McCarthy, wondering, who's going to fill the vacuum. There was talk of some Republican members of the House nominating Trump for the spot, and he even kind of said, I could fill in maybe on an interim basis. What do you make of this and what's happening? Is Trump really out of the running, or is he still going to try to keep his name in there even after he's endorsed Jordan?
No, I think Trump's out of the running. I think he's a bit busy with all of these court cases he's got to deal with, probably going to try and appeal that fraud case. So I think there's a lot going on in the Trump camp, probably too much going on for him to also be Speaker of the House. I think Jim Jordan's kind of a predictable pick for Donald Trump. I don't know if we'll see Republicans come out and support Jim Jordan. I think the most fascinating development is Matt Gaetz deciding to kind of align himself with some of the populist faction of the Democratic Party. The other day, when talking about this, talking about the expulsion of Kevin McCarthy, I was like, what would be really cool? If the populist faction of either party worked together to actually get something done and pressure the establishment to make some policy changes. Now we're seeing an inkling of that happening. So I think it's possible it won't be Kevin McCarthy after 30 votes again. But maybe it'll be Kevin McCarthy because they agree to Khanna's plan. That might not happen because the plan's a lofty one and a lot of members of Congress really like trading stocks. But I think we're in an interesting position. It might end up being someone like Tom Emmer, but I don't think it's going to be a Jim Jordan or a Donald Trump, to be honest. What's your prediction?
Yeah, no, I think it's been very interesting to see how sort of the battle lines have changed a little bit, even just on the Republican side of the House after all this happened. Obviously, like you mentioned, that plan from Khanna is something that I think a lot of the American people would obviously support because it's getting rid of things like, members of Congress being able to do these stock trades that obviously aid them in their very profitable endeavors sort of outside of the House chamber. But it will be interesting to see, sort of where those battle lines come down, because you have the people who were in leadership under McCarthy kind of looking to just move up the ladder a rung or two. But obviously Jim Jordan now, especially with Trump's endorsement, is seen kind of as the outsider. But it'll be interesting to see where, again, that support actually falls among that very narrow GOP majority. But in the wake of Tuesday's proverbial coup on Capitol Hill, lobbyists cozy with the Republican establishment are already out to avenge ousted Speaker Kevin McCarthy. According to reporting by a friend of the show, Lee Fang, a Ukraine government lobbyist is calling for Matt Gaetz's expulsion over what happened.
So now Matt Gaetz, as we've said, has made the rounds, railing against the influence of special interests on the Republican agenda in Congress. He took to Twitter yesterday to propose an arrangement to Republicans looking to raise the threshold on the motion to vacate the speakership, saying, enact the reforms recently proposed by Democratic Representative Khanna, and you have a deal. Khanna was actually on Rising just last month talking about his reform bill. Let's watch that.
The president and members of Congress, we should have zero PAC money. We should not have leadership PACs. I don't take PAC money, never have, don't have a leadership PAC. We shouldn't have money from corporations or lobbyists. Members of Congress shouldn't be allowed to go become lobbyists ever. Members of Congress shouldn't benefit personally through stock trading. Members of Congress should be term limited, as should Supreme Court justices, and we need an ethics code for Supreme Court justices. The amazing thing is this common sense proposal has had so much support from across the aisle, and I think it is a opportunity for us to run on reform, to make reform. No one in the current political system is perfect. What voters are looking for is a bold agenda to fix the system.
This week, Matt Gaetz laid out how a small number of politicians hold the country's interests captive in service to large dollar donors. Let's watch.
There is a sophisticated system in Washington, D.C. that takes all of the major spending decisions we have to make, and it backs those decisions up against shutdown politics and the end of the year and holidays. in the hopes that a very small group of people can make the major decisions regarding the entire $7 trillion federal budget. And when they do that, they're able to market to lobbyists and special interests that their authority and power is supercharged, and thus they're able to extract more money from those lobbyists and special interests. There are hundreds of millions of dollars worth of IOUs on K Street right now, where the lobbyists all have their offices, that are about as useful as Confederate money, with Kevin McCarthy out of the speakership. Because to his, give the guy his due, he raised $500 million for Republican campaigns, but a lot of that money came with strings attached.
So Matt Gaetz making some substantive points. Unlikely partnership, Khanna and Matt Gaetz. We said the same thing about Matt Gaetz and AOC when they were initially talking about insider trading in Congress. I think this is a step forward. I think having members of the majority party using their leverage to get things done is good. The Republicans didn't actually have to give up any real power for Matt Gaetz to leverage this. A lot of people said AOC and the squad using their power within the Democratic Party on the left would result in potentially the Democrats losing the speakership as a whole. I think Matt Gaetz has proven that there's a way to do this without costing your party the majority seat, and you have some leverage to get something real done here.
Absolutely. And I think, when you talk to people outside of the Beltway, which is a really good thing to do, and I think too few people, both in elected office and the media in this town, do that. Everybody just talks about how, Congress is corrupt. These are all crooks. They're just here to spend your money, your tax dollars, and you never actually see the result of what the government is supposedly doing with your money. And a lot of that, again, goes back to things like this insider trading, things like this revolving door between Capitol Hill and K Street. And you understand why the American people are so fed up with this, because, again, they're not seeing the benefit every time somebody goes out on TV and says, we achieved this for the American people, and the American people turn around and say, okay, where is it? And so I think addressing that would be something that would be very popular with the American people, who again want changes like this to be made, so that way they know that when they vote for somebody to represent them in DC, they're not just taking that sort of the assent of the governed and then turning around and using that as just a money printer for themselves in order to do these stock trades that they get a ton of money for, to only work with and listen to their former colleagues who have moved on to be lobbyists. I think that sort of important step would be good. And like you said, in this way, Matt Gaetz has allowed sort of this discussion to come about, even without giving up the Republican majority in the House, which obviously I think should be viewed as a win for conservatives who are for smaller government and a more transparent government.
Yeah, I think a lot of members of Congress, and just like American politicians as a whole, have gotten away for so long with this narrative that the economy is something that runs entirely independent of the government. We have a free market. No, of course, the decisions of Congress influence what happens in our economy, what businesses fail, what businesses succeed. They have a lot of power. You, a member of Congress with the task of regulating corporate America, regulating our economic activity within the country and abroad in many ways, you should not be allowed to invest in the same companies and corporations that you regulate. You don't only directly regulate the corporations that you can invest in currently as a member of Congress, but you also in many ways regulate the workforce that they hire. You regulate the materials that they rely on to produce whatever it is they produce as they come in across our border. So to think that those same members of Congress can invest in stock and trade in Wall Street is insane. If you stop any average person on the street, they would say, obviously, that's a conflict of interest, that they could take a bunch of money from a corporation as well on the lobbying front and then govern in the direction of whatever legislation that company wants. You're now accountable to that corporation if they're paying you more than your regular congressional salary. Now you work for them. You don't work for the American people that elected you. And so it's about time that we have legislation like this. I think people are also ready for term limits, given what we've seen with how old members of Congress are.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think there's been a lot of concern just watching the way the government has functioned in the last, year or so. There's been a lot of questions about who's in charge and how they got those positions. And like you were pointing out, who are they actually answering to? Are they answering to the voters who sent them to Washington, or are they answering to some other power that might not have the best interests of the American people at large in mind? Definitely something to keep an eye on, especially term limits. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.